Hi. This is my first attempt at a video on this blog. Actually my second, but my first attempt in a blog post. I figure a mix is a little more engaging than just me writing all the time, so I hope you find this engaging and worth your time. And forgive it if it's a little rough around the edges. So, my video tonight, my purpose for my blog is to code the things that life is teaching me. Have a space to kind of write it down, and I find that by explaining things through writing and through verbal communication, I learn them deeper. So that's what this is about for me tonight. And my blog post tonight has to do with some lessons I learned last week through a mishap in video games that I experienced with my nephew. I hope you find some interest in this. I'm titling the lessons that I learned under the title, Don't Touch the Big Red Button. And so to give some background, I love video games. I'm a video gamer. I don't generally treat them as... I mean, sometimes it's nice to just kind of beat up some baddies at the end of a long day. That's fun. I'm not going to pretend that it isn't. But more importantly to me, video games have become a way to invite life lessons through the narratives and through just the process of playing a game that ordinarily would take a lot more cost and effort to learn. And in that way, they become almost kind of a microcosm. That's the plus of a virtual space. That's its advantage. So, as part of that, I use video games as a relationship and teaching tool with my niece and nephews. I love my niece and nephews. I enjoy interacting with them, and video games are a chief way I do that. To help them, to connect with them, you know, through trusting them with my electronics, through trusting them with my games, through playing the games with them on occasion and guiding them through the gaming process. That's kind of, you know, what video games do for me in relationship to them. And so in connection with that, I was letting my 9-year-old nephew, Tragan, play a game of mine called SimCity 4 last weekend. And SimCity 4, for those of you who don't know, is, as it sounds like, a city simulation game. You build roads, you take a parcel of simulated land and you build roads, and you put power stations and schools and hospitals, and you put zones, and you try to build cities kind of organically through that process. It's really fun, at least for me. I really enjoy it. I've enjoyed it. It's been one of my favorite games since I was like 12. So, of course, my nephew had no interest in any of that. One of the fun little options in this game is you can destroy your city with disasters. There's volcanoes, and there's tornadoes, and there's meteors, and UFOs that'll suck all the cars off the streets and stuff. It's kind of a fun way to, like, if you just want to have some fun and destroy some things, there you go, you know? And so there's a way to save your city and then go destroy it and then bring it back to where it was before, so I decided, you know, why not? I brought up this big city that I had worked really hard on. It had all these skyscrapers that had developed on their own, which are hard to get in the game. You know, I had the Chrysler building, like, that was my city. The downtown of this big metropolis I'd been working on. And so, you know, I thought it would be fun to let them just kind of go through and destroy the whole thing, right? Well, let me show you a little thing that happened through that process. So, this is the interface for SimCity 4. And this button right here, with the little tornado on it, that's the disasters button. You click on that and all of the disasters come up here. You know, you've got your UFOs and your tornadoes and your lightning and your fire and your meteors and your robots, and, you know, you can just kind of press on them and then click your way through the city and destroy it, right? Well, my nephews saw this button right here. And of course, they thought, dynamite! Oh, that sounds fun. Well, let me tell you something about that little... that is not dynamite. What that button does is it erases your city permanently from your memory. So, got distracted. I was looking at the TV. My parents were watching something interesting, and I heard this awful noise come from my computer. And I turned around to watch my big, beautiful city with a Chrysler building that took many hours of work dissolve into cyberspace. Oof. It's painful. It was painful. As a gamer, that was painful. And I had the wisdom in that moment to breathe. And it invited, as video games tend to do for me, it invited a series of lessons for me that I find important for me to express and try to internalize and apply. As well as a couple that I then tried to teach my nephew. So for the next section of this, I will explain the lessons that I learned, and then I'll wrap this video up. And yeah, so this is what I learned from that experience. The first thing that I learned is that anger generates terrible responses generally, but especially when the offending behavior came from ignorance. And I'll say that again. Anger generates terrible responses generally, but especially when the offending behavior came from ignorance. I'll explain a little. My nephews, especially the one in control of the mouse, thought that was just dynamite. They had no idea what that button meant. And they eliminated my city not out of spite or malice, but ignorance. They didn't know any better. If I'd come blazing in with my battle axe of indignation, chopping their egos in half, what would that have done? It would have taught them that ignorance is worthy of shame. And it's not. It is not. When we get angry at other people for something that they've done in ignorance, it doesn't teach them anything, especially the vulnerable ones in our care. It just teaches them to fear us. And it teaches them to fear making mistakes. And I'm really glad in that moment I had the presence of mind to breathe and choose a different response, because that would have been the consequences of me obliterating their egos with the big red button of my anger. So that was my first lesson. Second lesson. Communicating and enforcing boundaries beforehand prevents future mishaps. Communicating and enforcing boundaries beforehand prevents future mishaps. If I had had the presence of mind, I could have simply said, guys, this big red button, this is what it does. Please don't touch it. I didn't think to do that. I just gave them the game and said, go ahead. When we are able to communicate and enforce boundaries beforehand, that builds trust. It builds an environment where trusting relationships are set up to succeed in the first place. How many awful mishaps do we have in our relationships, in our workplaces, etc., when we don't communicate and enforce boundaries beforehand, saying and anticipating what might go wrong, especially for somebody who might be new and learning. So that was my second. Communicating and enforcing boundaries beforehand prevents many future mishaps. My third lesson. I would rather others, especially my niece and nephews, learn not to press the big red button through a video game medium rather than stumbling upon that lesson in everyday life. I'll repeat that. I would rather they learn not to press the big red button through video games than to experience the costs of making that mistake in everyday life. And what that means for me, video games, again, are a fantastic teaching tool. They aren't as costly. That is a lesson. Not touching the big red button is a lesson that in real life comes with a lot of costs and a lot of consequences that can be lifelong. We get angry in traffic or in any other medium, and or we just make those mistakes, those big red button mistakes, and poof, there goes your bank account, there goes your this, that, or the other. I would rather they learn that through a video game medium where the cost to me is simply of my time. That is a much more cost-effective way of teaching that lesson. So that's my third lesson. I would rather they learn not to press the big red button through video games rather than any other medium. Fourth lesson. Giving someone an opportunity necessitates risk. I think this is important for me to understand anytime that I give anybody else an opportunity in the future. In the case I ever become a business owner or a husband or a father, as I continue to forge relationships with men, giving others opportunities necessitates risk. What risks am I going to take? It's best to be conscious beforehand, wouldn't you think? Anticipating those enables me to, again, build a container and a situation of safety so that I can say, okay, well, we'll anticipate this happening, and so if it does, okay. But that was my fourth big lesson. Giving someone an opportunity necessitates risk. I need to be aware of what those are. Now, on the other hand, those are what I learned, and this is what I tried to teach my nephew. 2 lessons. First, don't take an action if you don't understand the consequences. Now, this little button, if you press it, comes up with a prompt that says, are you sure you want to do this? It will erase your city permanently. And then it says accept or cancel, and you have an option to cancel it. My nephew just pressed the button and hit accept. Had he taken the time to read, he would have known what was going to happen. Don't take an action before you understand the consequences. Second, I'm going to use my right hand because I'm trying to illustrate with the 2 hands. Second, it's just a game. After this happened, I told them, okay, guys, we're done playing games. They kind of knew I was upset, so they kind of scurried away from my computer. And in that moment, with the anger percolating, I had some options. And I looked at my nephew, my beautiful, precious, wonderful nephew, Traken. I looked him in the eyes. And in that moment, I realized all that frustration was real and valid. But he was more important. It's just a game. What are we investing our emotions in? What am I investing my emotions in? If it's not in the relationships that matter the most and in the things that I'm trying to learn in life that will make me a better person in relation to others, it is not worth, it's all just a game. This life is just a game, of sorts. Forgiveness, compassion, respect, all of those communicate to others that they are more important to us than the material things. It's just a game. Let it go. That doesn't make it right if somebody else abuses our time and space. But it's just a game. Other people and our relationships to them and our actions towards them are much more important and reflect who we are much more deeply than the kinds of things we possess and the kinds of things that we do and the kinds of games that we run. So, to wrap that up, I am grateful to have learned what I learned through that medium. It was a wonderful opportunity for me to exercise patience and caution and to remember it's just a game, but please don't touch the big red button. All right. Thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, I appreciate it. And I will see you on the next steps.